Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Facebook friend here, Sean O'Connor, and I'm with a very important guest. Mark has a unique experience. He has worked with the United States government. You're a contractor.
Well, I worked in a company that was, well, on several occasions actually.
Thank you.
Okay, so we can.
Oh, we've got people here, so we might as well just go for it.
All right.
Okay, so that was a test run, but okay. So we're here with Mark Lewis, and Mark Lewis is an engineer,
Right.
But he's an engineer who has worked with the U.S. government under Obama administration, correct?
Well, actually, I was working as an aerospace engineer in several companies, and I've been involved in, on occasion, military issues, and also I've been involved in civil aviation, and certainly when I was in one company, I was involved in making sure that weaponizable materials didn't fall into the hands of terrorists and rogue nations. That was one of the jobs that I did, yes. So I was an analyst, I was an export analyst, yeah, that's true.
Okay, so you have experience in gauging national security threats. That's part of what you've done.
Well, yeah, that was one brief period of time, yes, that I was involved in that.
So I just want our viewers to understand that you are someone who's qualified to discuss national security issues, and want them to know that this is not coming out of our arses, so to speak.
Well, you know, as an aerospace engineer, I think we all in aerospace, and people who are in aerospace, who've worked on military projects, have a certain feel for that sort of thing, yeah.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, just want you to know we have a gentleman who is qualified and capable in discussing some of the national security threats that we face. And also he has comments on the Trump administration in general, and specifically the president. The two of us today want to talk to you about the case for impeaching the president of the United States. I just want to give you a little bit of context, ladies and gentlemen. Mark and I have been having conversations for quite some time now, and we're trying to help launch a movement to compel Congress to impeach the president of the United States. And we've been going back and forth. We've been listing our complaints of the president's illegal, immoral, treasonous behavior, and getting it all compact and presentable, and figuring out the best ways to make that information presented to our members of Congress as well as our fellow Americans.
I think it's safe to say that we both talked to, through their staff or maybe directly, our own representatives in Congress, and specifically listed what it was that we feel should be done on various issues, and in particular with regard to removing the president from office.
Right. So Mark actually prepared a statement that he would like to offer to you, ladies and gentlemen. So I would like, Mark, if you would take this opportunity to share your thoughts with us.
This sort of frames my feelings on the matter. In the late summer of 2017, the GOP, under Senator McConnell, attempted to forego regular order and strip 30 million people of their health care and transfer that money to the wealthy. Senator McCain made a speech on the Senate floor advocating a return to regular order, calling for input from citizens and experts before creating such legislation. This is consistent with my understanding of promoting the general welfare and ensuring domestic tranquility called for in the U.S. Constitution. Senator McCain asserted the role of Congress when he said of President Trump, "We are not his subordinates, we are his equal."
Amen.
I say now, we are not the equal of government. We are their superior.
Amen.
We issue lawful orders through our representatives, and government carries them out in accordance with the U.S. Constitution. Further, we do not negotiate our inalienable rights, or we the people, or government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Those matters have been settled on the battlefield, in the Revolutionary War, and in the Civil War. I believe it is time for Congress to respond to the will of the people by impeaching and removing from office President Donald Trump due to his violation of his constitutional oath of office. Also, the Congress must return to regular order and act as an advocate for the people, ensuring domestic tranquility and promoting the general welfare.
Mark, that was eloquent beyond belief. And you did that. You did that on the. You didn't spend weeks preparing that.
No, this has sort of been coming to me, over time. I think that, one of the things that I was particularly moved by, because I was very seriously concerned, as many people were, about what would happen if Congress actually trashed the Affordable Care Act. And I was really moved by Senator McCain's speech on the Senate floor when he moved from what I understood, to be this idea of, let's get back to the idea of putting together, hearing from people that are concerned about losing their Medicaid or their health care, or losing access to affordable care because of having their patient protections stripped away from them in terms of pre-existing condition protections, and insurance companies not being able to just simply drop you from the coverage, if you get sick or something like that, where he advocated for a return to regular order. And basically my understanding of that, from what I've learned from the press, and this is the source of information that we all have, is enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution, to make decisions and issue lawful orders, is that basically the idea is, committee meetings should be held before legislation is enacted, where we can hear from ordinary citizens, and we can also hear from experts, doctors, medical advocacy groups, etc. Get to some point where we have a piece of legislation that does serve the people, because I believe what Lincoln stated in the Gettysburg Address, that it should be government of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Mark, I think you make a really solid point about this being a government of the people, and the president, through his numerous violations of laws, ethical standards, and his treasonous behavior, he doesn't seem to care about the American people. And one thing that really struck me, and I'd like your thoughts on this, if you heard this little news bit last week, President Trump contemplated actually handing over U.S. citizens to Vladimir Putin so that he could interrogate them for phony crimes. I thought, wow, the president is willing to throw average Americans under the bus if it means maintaining and preserving this really disturbing, sick, treasonous relationship with Russia. I wonder how you interpret this.
I was appalled by that. I think a lot of people probably put themselves, as I did, in the place of these people that he was proposing to just hand over to a foreign government. And it does kind of shake, the foundations of your security.
Yeah.
To think that, you mean I can have my right to due process stripped away from me and just be handed over to some foreign government? I mean, if he can do that with high officials, why can't he do it with anyone?
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the reasons why I was moved to, call my congressman and ask him to remove the president from office. I mean, the punchline for me, the thing that finally, moved me over that line and say, okay, it's time for Congress to impeach or remove the president from office, is what Trump was doing on the US-Mexico border, where there were people, amongst them, of course, as we all know, little children and babies who were petitioning, from what I understand, completely legal to do this, for asylum due to the fact that they were being persecuted in their own country, and they were stripped of that due process, and they were being told, well, I'm sorry, but we don't care about any of that. And then they were torn away from their families and put in these compounds. I guess the press is referring to them as jails now.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really the deciding point for me. Up until then, I'd been very concerned about my own health care being taken away from me, and Trump's carelessness in terms of the things that he's been doing and sabotaging the Affordable Care Act. But now he's beating up on little babies and little children. That was just over the line for me.
I agree with you, Mark. And actually, it's funny because I remember the same day you and I said we'd had enough and that it was time for impeachment. We both said it. The tipping point was with the babies being torn from their parents on the border. Yeah. It was what we had been talking, and we both brought up to the other person that this had upset us. And then we said this was it. This cannot be allowed to happen. The president needs to be removed.
I think one of the things that you said that was interesting was that you said, I don't like the idea of this being done in my name. And I thought, yeah, that's important. And that's consistent with the idea that this is government of the people, by the people. That's it represents us.
And an important note on by the people and the president's utter disregard for the people, it goes back to the 2016 election, because the president doesn't want to address the interference into that election. But we're talking about a government, right? You said for the people, by the people. Our vote is supposed to count, and our vote is supposed to be well-informed, properly informed, and not tainted by disinformation tossed on us by the Russian government.
Well, one of the things that's bothered me and a lot of people is Trump's persistence in putting a knife through the First Amendment.
Absolutely.
By suggesting that everything that's available from these, conventional sources of news that are well tested, some of them have conservative elements like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and the broadcast networks, NBC, CNN, they're all fake news.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically what that's doing is it's saying, all right, then I don't have any information, so I can't make any decisions.
So whatever Trump says is true, and that's
right.
that. And you really, really, really made a good point in bringing up the First Amendment. This is something I brought up to viewers earlier this morning. When the president decided to talked about removing the security clearances for former intelligence officers, I saw that as a major red flag, because now we see that individuals who are openly and explicitly critical of the president of the United States are being told they can't talk. Their access to information is being stripped from them. But it's not only that, it's that they're being targeted for their speech, that they're being harassed because of their speech, and that they're being delegitimized by government officials because of their speech. That's the kind of dangerous stuff that happens in Putin's Russia, that we were supposed to be not like that.
And this is kind of, I see it as being consistent with what was going on in the Nixon administration. And as I've talked to you about this before, I settled on this as being a good model for this presidency, based on some issues that I had with some similarities I noted between Trump and Nixon based on the documentaries that had been produced about both of them. Fairly soon after he was elected, because I was trying to figure out, well, what would be a good model? I tried a lot of different possibilities. I thought, well, maybe Carter might be a good model because he was kind of a newcomer to federal government. And I thought, maybe Truman might be a good model because, as I understood it, there was a brief flirtation that he had with the Ku Klux Klan. And I know that Trump has had some issues with regard to racial problems. And what I settled upon was the Nixon model, and it turned out that that was a pretty good one, and it's been used quite often in the press. And one of the things about the Nixon model that we should be looking at with regard to what you're saying about the press is his enemies list and how he was, going about trying to target people to silence them. So yeah, that's chilling. And one thing that really bothers me is anytime that information is threatened to be cut off, you need information in order to make rational decisions. And so any attempt that Trump makes to discredit the press or to say that it's all fake news or it's all lies, it's very disturbing to me.
I agree, and I hate to get into the emotional aspect of this, but you use the word disturbing, and ladies and gentlemen, I want to convey that this has become an emotional issue. It's become an emotional issue for me as someone who aspires to be a critical thinker. You bring up manipulation of information, intimidation of those who communicate information, present information, or have access to information that gives me panic attack. Makes me feel like I'm in a panic attack mode.
You really feel like you're on that roller coaster.
Yes.
And it's just cresting, and it starts to drop, and you feel your seat drop out from under you.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden you have no foundation.
Yes.
For any kind of rational assessment of the situation to reach any kind of rational conclusion, because everybody knows that if you're going to reach a rational conclusion, that's got to be based on the facts.
Right.
And if you start messing around with the facts or editing them out or cherry picking them or however it is you want to express this, then your conclusion is invalid. Exactly.
And Senator Jeff Flake spoke on the Senate floor, and he referred to this, I don't want to call it a phenomenon, but it really is, and how wild things are. He described it as Orwellian, and I think this sort of gives an analogy for our viewers perhaps to understand. We are living in Orwellian times. If we bring up a fact of reality, right, the Trump cult will just change the subject or lie.
Well, one of the things that I kind of, you probably know more about the literature than I do, but one of the things that I remember hearing about in terms of my understanding of Orwellian types of situations is this idea that black is white and white is black, up is down and down is up.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Disorientation.
That's a very good word.
From any kind of objective facts or information.
It's dizzying.
Allows for people to be put in a position where they really have no other basis for reaching a conclusion other than, well, that's what the president said.
I agree.
And this is one of the things that I remember thinking about Watergate. And this is where the Nixon analogy comes in. The Nixon model comes in very useful. The idea that, one of the things that I always kind of think about now, whenever I'm gathering facts or information, I'm very fussy about this, is, you're not just going to believe whatever the headline is or whatever the conclusion is that's delivered to you by anybody. You'd think that nobody learned anything from Watergate. Because, even when I'm, in my studies, when I was going through textbooks, I wouldn't just take their word for it. I'd go through and, fill in the blanks between the equations for myself and figure out what the proofs and the derivations were. And similarly, in civics, as citizens, you have to take the information from the sources that you have in the press and, vet them carefully. I think that's important. And compare them and contrast them against one another and get information from more than one source and reach your own conclusions. So when I hear, Trump talking about how, well, it's fake news or they're all liars, that's really disturbing because, he's messing with the basic foundation of reaching rational conclusions. And it's rational conclusions that allow us to make up our minds about what lawful orders we will transmit to government through our Congress.
I think that
Congress, through our representatives. And so, that's very disturbing.
I think you said it exactly. So right with this fake news thing, one thing that really stands out to me is that for some reason, news organizations that publish any material that poses President Trump in a negative light is fake news. Any news that spins everything into his favor and makes him look good is the right news. And it is so blatantly obvious. That's the thing. It's so blatantly obvious.
Well, one of the things that we were talking about before is this issue of, something that occurred to me when I was sitting at my desk once in the aerospace industry. And I was, thinking about things, and it occurred to me, a very disturbing thought occurred to me. And that is, you can make anything sound reasonable. That's just a matter of rhetorical skill or oratory.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's that moment when, you're going over the crest of the roller coaster and the seat drops out from under you because it's like, oh no. So what does that mean in terms of, I can't just, listen to what anybody says. So what are the specific criteria that I need in order to reach a firm conclusion so that I can act on it or instruct my congressman to act on it? And it's very important to understand the dynamics of how you reach a rational conclusion. That's why we need education in this country. And what we need to bear in mind is that you can't just listen to anyone's oratory or anyone's conclusion that they're handing to you without, I believe the word that you would probably use is unpacking that and getting to the bottom of, oh, okay, that's opinion, that's fact. Let me go check the facts with other sources and reach some kind of a conclusion for myself, and then put that in the proper perspective. And he seems to be attacking that with his constant, and it was all through the campaign, and it still is true now, attacking that. Another issue that concerns me about Trump is these references I keep hearing to the deep state.
Yes. Comey is part of the deep state, and as is Mueller, and is anyone in the intelligence or in the bureaucracy who is critical of Donald Trump. And
it seemed to me as though there was a tract in that book, Fire and Fury, that they talked about on MSNBC at one point, where they were talking about a conversation between Trump and Bannon. And I can't remember the particulars of it, but Trump was saying, well, if I fire somebody, then I don't have to worry about that anymore. And
really,
Bannon pointed out, as I recall, yeah, but the problem is that they'll just promote somebody else up into that spot, and you'll be right back where you started from again. And it's kind of occurred to me that when Trump talks about the deep state, what he's really talking about is constitutional democracy. Because that's what he's fighting.
That's exactly what he's fighting.
And he wants to say, no. I just want to take over and pull the levers of government. Everything will go through me and all your problems will be solved. And that's very, very dangerous.
It's very dangerous. And you talked about, again, this being a government of the people, by the people. And we talked about being well informed so that we can communicate our wishes to members of Congress. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we're doing this,
right? Because
we're hoping you guys will call Congress,
right?
Right.
We need to get, as I said, I believe it was Ambassador Sherman who was being interviewed recently in the news, and in the wake of all of this, embarrassing situation that burbled up because of the Helsinki appearance, that the press conference that Trump had with Putin. And one of the things that Ambassador Sherman recommended was that ordinary citizens need to start speaking out. And so this is certainly a manifestation of that.
Yeah, amen. And really, any platform you have, you don't have to do what we're doing and do a Facebook live stream. Talk to your friends about it. talk to your parents about it, talk to your other members of your family, your coworkers. Let it be known that you view our presidency as problematic and that the president needs to be removed. And Congress will hear you guys. They keep track of everybody's opinions, everything everybody says, and they give that data to their elected official so that that elected official knows how to get reelected by picking the popular points. So just let Congress know that they'll get reelected if they vote for Trump, if they vote to impeach Trump. They will not be reelected otherwise.
I think that, this again goes back to the Nixon model, because one of the things about that was that I kind of got out of documentaries I've seen about that is that when we removed Nixon from office, that sent a strong message to the world, to our friends and allies, to our enemies, and to the people in this country, the citizens of this country, that constitutional democracy does function well. And I think by moving through the process of impeachment, trial in the Senate, and removal from office is going to send a very, very strong message to our friends and allies, to our enemies abroad, to the people, the citizens of this country, that constitutional democracy does function. That, we can pursue a legal constitutional course and achieve good ends.
I think you make a fantastic point that we do want our democracy to survive. We do want to show that democracy can work and it can send a message to the world. I think it's important to point out that Russia doesn't want the U.S. democracy to work.
I think that they're interested. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what's going on in the minds of the people, in governments in other countries. But what I'm sensing is that, they want us to move in the direction of an oligarchy.
Yeah, I agree with you. I entirely agree with you.
And that's one of the reasons why it is that I wrote the statement that I did. I started out by talking about the whole issue of the healthcare laws, because I can't imagine anything that's a more immediate threat to people than being stripped of their health care. And it seemed to me as though the whole notion about this, from what I gleaned out of the press, was that the idea was we need to save a lot of money so we can give tax breaks to wealthy people. Well, that's a step towards an oligarchy. You don't want to strip people of their general welfare. You don't want to trash the domestic tranquility. That's completely at odds with what our country is supposed to be about.
Yeah, and you make the point about the threat of us becoming an oligarchy and money disproportionately being taken from the working class to the rich. Another thought I have on that line is this. I'm losing my thought there.
Okay. I wonder if you're thinking about Robert Reich and his documentary.
I was thinking about Trump's refusal to show his tax returns.
Oh,
So what I was getting at is that not only is it the rich exploiting the poor, it's also through corrupt means, and not just like not paying enough, but through money laundering and other kinds of financial crimes that get protected because the president refuses to reveal his tax.
I think the thing that really disturbed me in terms of that's even more, I think, directly to the point of seizing control of government, because we are the people and it's government by the people, is this whole issue of last year's headlong rush by the GOP to try and ramrod through this legislation to strip people of their health care. And from what I understood, GOP Congress members weren't even really sure what they were voting for. They didn't know what was in the bill. The word came down. We got to vote. We got to get this thing through. There were sort of, staged committees that were set up where people were in there trying to protest and they were hauled out. People who were handicapped were hauled out
Yeah, I
and
think
put in like handcuffs because they were trying to say, hey, don't kill me. I need my health care. That was all just put, all the regular order that Senator John McCain was referring to in his speech was all put aside because we got to get this through. And one of the things that, speaking of Congress now, is in their, trying to push something through, is this latest Supreme Court nomination. I think that it's time to say, okay, on this one occasion, let's go ahead and observe the McConnell rule. We're close to an election. Let's let people go and vote. And then afterwards, when the new Congress is seated, then we can go through and figure out who's going to be the replacement for Kennedy.
and this is really important, ladies and gentlemen.
In the meantime, what we need to focus on is the emergency, as you put it, of trying to address this issue of putting, constitutional democracy to work to right what's going wrong in our country, and focus on that now.
Mark is completely correct, and we need to bring up the Supreme Court pick for a very particular reason, because Trump's pick, Judge Kavanaugh, has been on the record as saying he doesn't think the president should be allowed to be indicted. His interpretation of the law is that the president can't be indicted, the president can't be investigated, the president can fire an investigator if he so chooses. So we need to be clear that Congress, and the Senate in particular, by focusing on this Supreme Court pick, they are giving Trump a get-out-of-jail-free card, as Senator Booker put it. And this is why you need to call Congress now. And like Mark said, you need to tell them to drop everything and address this cancer within the presidency, to cite a reference from Watergate.
I think it was John Dean.
I don't know. You know it better than I do.
I think that was the moment that John Dean, what you're referring to, I believe that's the guy's name, right? The president's counsel was confronting, President Nixon about, Nixon was kind of urging, that they try and cover this thing up by paying off the burglars, and John Dean was struggling with him, trying to get him off that track, and he finally, said, well, Mr. President, I mean, this could take a lot of money, to solve this problem that way. Well, how much? And it kind of, as I remember him discussing this in some documentary, I pulled an astronomical number out of my head. I said, well, it could cost us $1 million. And Nixon looked over, I guess, at his chief of staff and said, well, I know where that can be got. We could get that, and at that point, he was like, this is really starting to get out of hand. Mm-hmm. And he prefaced this whole thing, as you say, by saying, there's a cancer on the presidency and it's growing.
Mm-hmm. And to cite you said that this is out of hand. I think, ladies and gentlemen, if you could take away one thing from us, this has actually gotten out of hand. I know a lot of people generally don't care about politics. They feel detached from it, it's abstract, or it doesn't affect them.
Right.
It needs to be clear that if the Trump presidency persists, it will impact all of us in very dangerous ways. And things that we need to worry about, for example, if you're a critical thinker and you're critical of the president, Trump will go after you. We're his critics. Also, think about the fact that he's undermining our democracy by sowing discord. We talked about how he's
trying to foist on this, silly deep state, conspiracy theory on everybody. What he's really, I think, talking about when he says deep state is government of the people, by the people, and for the people, constitutional democracy.
That's the thing. He's actually attempting to delegitimize our way of governing ourselves. And ourselves, as he said. And this is what I think needs to be understood. The president has overreached in his authority. Beyond treason, abuse of power, right? Abuse of power, treason, obstruction of justice. These are really serious offenses. And while this is happening, as the Washington Post reported today, Russia is engaged in cyber warfare with us. They have been into our energy infrastructure, and they may be responsible for blackouts that have occurred. So what kind of threat do we pose here? Trump is doing nothing about Russia. Trump is saying all kinds of nice things and doing whatever Russia wants. Meanwhile, what happens if our power goes out because Russia turns it off? If you have loved ones in the hospital, like, die. I mean, this is serious stuff. We need to stand up for ourselves.
I think I'm heartened by some articles that I remember reading, dug up on the internet from, as I recall, solid sources that indicated that it is really not something that is really a serious worry that votes are going to be changed or that the election is going to be rigged. And another thing that I thought was very heartening was what former FBI Director James Comey had to say here recently, who is, I guess, a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yeah, vote Democratic. And also, of course, columnist George Will,
Mm-hmm.
who is a very well-known conservative columnist, also urged people to vote Democratic. So I think that, it's important for everybody to understand that it's still within our hands to take control and change the power dynamic in Washington by putting a Democratic Congress in control. And certainly it would be very, very helpful if we could get both houses to be Democratic, because then that would shut down any attempts to undermine things in terms of the judicial branch,
Right.
In terms of approving federal judgeships. I believe that goes through the Senate,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
So that will moderate things. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
very heartened also by the results of special elections, particularly the Senate election in Alabama,
Mm-hmm.
which you would think, if the Russians had so much control, that would have gone overwhelmingly Republican. But it didn't. We got a Democrat in there. And there's also a lot of acknowledgement, I think, in Congress due to a lot of resignations from Republican members of the House. And then, of course, the Speaker of the House said, we're going to resign too. And this is a very, common trend, as I understand it. The bad news, as I said before to you, about being elected president of the United States is that you've only got about 2 years. And then, everyone's going to sort of think about what it is you're doing and say, okay, let's put the brakes on this, which can be very frustrating. But that's constitutional democracy. Sometimes it can be frustrating. So I think there's a lot of hope, and you should definitely not be discouraged, from going out and certainly talking to your Congress people, and certainly going to the voting booth and encouraging other people to vote, because a lot of times, during midterm elections, things kind of get a little watered down.
Not as sexy as a presidential election.
Well, I was kind of thinking that maybe one of the issues that might, perk people up is this whole issue of, the fragility of the Roe versus Wade decision. That might motivate a lot of people to get out and vote. Because I think that I was sort of sensing in the press that, people were kind of getting a little, the outrage was kind of dying down and the energy was kind of being dissipated away. And now
Mm-hmm.
that may be firing people up again. But definitely big turnouts is what we need.
Mark, I hope your optimism is right. And I think that there are some really encouraging things that I've also noticed. One being a lot of people are speaking out that I've never seen in my entire life. I've never seen, not only
including me.
Including
this is very new for me.
Yeah. So I mean, and this is an incredible opportunity to be able to talk with you in front of these wonderful viewers of ours.
Right. The internet is very, very powerful.
It's very awesome
medium.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very helpful.
I just want to say, really, I've never seen so many people talk out and with so much emotion. And one heartening thing, you're talking about heartening things, is the certain individuals who are speaking out our former governor, Christine Todd Whitman, a Republican, she called on President Trump to resign. That was huge. There's a Republican lawmaker in Texas who called on the president's impeachment. We have a large swath of individuals coming out now and saying, impeach Trump now. I see people on Twitter and Facebook, literally all they do with every second of time they have is keep generating that message, impeach Trump now, and highlighting the case for why it needs to be done. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that when so many individuals are moved to devote so much of their time, and they'd rather be doing other things,
or have to do other things.
Right. When we're spending our time, some people might call it obsessing. I call it just, trying to stand up for our well-being here. When it comes to this, hopefully that sends a message that we need a change, and we need a change now.
We also think it's important to kind of go on the record. One of the things that I was very moved by when I saw the documentary on Nixon was when they were, the special prosecutor in his case was pushing him to produce evidence, and I guess it was the tapes. And Nixon ordered his top of his DOJ to fire him. And then he refused and resigned. And then the next one down refused and he fired him. And then he finally found Bork, I guess it was, who said, okay, I'll fire him. And there were, telegrams coming in, as I recall, from all over the country demanding that Nixon be impeached.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's what we need to happen. We really need each and every one of you to pick up your cell phone and dial the phone numbers of your House of Representatives member and your senators. Your senators can't actually impeach the president, but they can demand their colleagues in the House of Representatives impeach the president.
And they're also going to be the trial.
Right.
The trial is in the Senate.
Right.
So they are involved.
Right.
But yeah, and it's impeach and removal from office is what we need.
Right.
To get, confidence restored, both in terms of our friends and allies, our enemies, and the citizens of this country.
Right. So Mark gave you guys the example from Watergate. Telegrams flooded to the White House demanding for to Congress.
I think it was, I'm not sure what was directed. I think it was probably Congress, but it was just, it kind of, for the first time, I think I really understood in the wake of what's been going on here in the Trump administration, how people felt during this time in the Nixon administration. Right. It was really, really frightening feeling, and especially when he moved to remove the special prosecutor and sealed his offices. It's like, what's Nixon doing? He's just trying to take over the country. Right. It's terrifying.
Right, and that's what's happening now. So just like there was a flood of telegrams demanding the impeachment of Richard Nixon, I hope you will all call your lawmakers and demand the impeachment of Trump. I hope you'll share this hashtag here, impeach Trump now. Do we have any concluding thoughts?
Well, basically, I think that my feeling is that, what it is that I stated at the beginning of this discussion in terms of what it is that I read, the prepared statements that I put together after thinking about it, really kind of goes to the heart of what it is that I'm trying to drive at here, is that I believe in constitutional democracy. And that is something that we're all responsible for. And we need to assert ourselves as being the superiors of government and move the legal mechanisms forward to restore constitutional democracy and its basic purpose to ensure domestic tranquility and promote the general welfare.
Well said. I guess my last thought is, if we could just again review the items presenting the legal case and really the case more generally, because the president actually doesn't have to break a law to be impeached. All that the Congress has to do is determine that he is politically not suitable for the job. That being said, I want to present the case item by item, the reasons exactly, precisely why Trump should be impeached, so that our viewers understand this isn't partisan. We believe in country over party. This has nothing to do with Republican or Democrat. This has to do with right and wrong. This has to do with constitutional law. And this has to do with being actually qualified or unqualified at one of the most important jobs in this country. So I don't know if you want me to go first, or if you want to go first and talk about, the items that you're most passionate about.
Well, I think I've kind of touched on some of the issues that I'm concerned about. Certainly, what he's done to sabotage the Affordable Care Act has been very disturbing to me. And but this involves more than just Trump. As I called for in my statement, I also want to see Congress return to regular order, as was, they were admonished to do by Senator McCain. And it's also true that I think that every individual should probably go and there's a discussion in the Cornell Law website. I don't know if you have that posted or not, because I gave you some links.
Yeah.
But and go through the Constitution and think about the issues that you're concerned about, and lay out the charges and specifications to your congressman in a very thoughtful manner, so that they can see that you're not somebody who's not serious.
Right.
You're somebody who's really put a lot of thought into this, and remind them of what their responsibilities are as being servants of the people.
Right. If Congress
I think it
knows,
has to be done by individuals. Each
Yep.
individual has
Mhm.
to sit down
Mhm.
and think very carefully about what their issues are, and put it in the terms of, article whatever of the Constitution, section whatever,
Mhm.
and transmit it to their Congress, their representative in Congress that way, so that they can really feel a gravitas of this.
Yeah, I like that. I believe that if Congress gets the message that the American people are a lot smarter than they thought,
Yeah,
that will wake them up. That will be very sobering for them.
sobering is a good word.
Though,
like that.
yeah. So you have a lot more power than you may believe that you have, ladies and gentlemen. I'll tell you my issues item by item. First of all, I believe that the president is guilty of treason. I believe he's guilty of treason not only for undermining the legitimacy of our intelligence community, but also for having the audacity to even suggest or contemplate handing over innocent Americans to be interrogated by a serial killer dictator of another country. That to me is sick beyond comprehension. It's very unprecedented, entirely unprecedented in America. So that's item number one. That's blatant treason. Item number two, obstruction of justice. We've seen Trump squirm at every attempt to block the investigation and discredit the investigation and do anything he could to stop it. Number three, abuse of power. And through his abuse of power, violate the First Amendment, which allows people the freedom of speech, when he had the audacity to single out the other day individuals in the intelligence community who are critical of him and say, we're going to revoke your security clearance because we don't like what you're saying because you're critical of President Trump. That's abuse of power used to violate the First Amendment. We also know another violation of the First Amendment with the Muslim ban, and saying people can't come to this country because they're Muslim. In this country, we believe in the freedom of religion. It's
Again, the
First Amendment. So those are just some reasons, but there are other reasons, other things going on here, such as we've talked about the violation of the Emoluments Clause, which says that the president can't receive essentially bribes from people.
It's also referred to in Article 2, Section 4, I believe. Bribery, treason, and other crimes and misdemeanors.
As the standard for impeachment.
Right.
Right. So this is a textbook case for when to impeach a president. If it's on a multiple choice test and they give you 3 examples of a set of things that a president could do and be impeached, this is a textbook example. So I believe that's the case. Any final thoughts?
Well, like I say, I'm just, I'm very, very concerned about what appears to be a sloppiness that seems to have emerged. with regard to adhering to the rule of constitutional law and constitutional democracy functioning for the ends of, as you know, Lincoln put it in his Gettysburg Address, for the people.
Mm-hmm.
That is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. And ladies and gentlemen, the point is we are the people.
Right.
We have political power.
Right.
And so each of you today, we hope, will activate or crank up your political power, call your members of Congress, post this on your Facebook, share it, tweet it, I don't know, Instagram it, Snapchat it, whatever. I don't know the social media that comprehensively.
You know more than I do.
I don't know. But please speak out. Speak out to your friends, your family, your coworkers, your acquaintances, and speak out to your members of Congress. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, so much for your time. Obviously, if you have comments, questions, etc., please leave your comments. And of course, we care to know what you think. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, have a good day. And Mark, time out of your day to come talk with me on Facebook live stream. Thank you.
I think you're right. I think, Ambassador Sherman is correct. We need to speak out. That's an important obligation we have as citizens.
Thank you, sir.
All right, great.
Okay, now, end live. Okay.